All right, welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom.
How are y'all doing?
And joining us now, Jake Verdon, GP Jacob, host of Money, Power, Land, Solidarity, and also a rapper. Money, Power, Land, Solidarity. My newest. I'm a new patron of the show. Yeah. I really like it. Working through the back catalog. I was talking with David before. Your conversation with August Nimps was, I think, very clarifying for folks. But let's talk about your podcast first, and then we'll get to Minneapolis as a whole. Introduce the show for us.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. The Money, Power, Land, Solidarity podcast. I'm the host. It's a collaboration between myself, the producer, Isaac Spector, and then Diana Siegel Garcia kind of does comms for us and research. It started in 2019 as a way to process a struggle that we were all a part of from various perspectives over the Upper Harbor Terminal. It's a redevelopment project in Minneapolis. So it's 48 acres of riverfront land in North Minneapolis. It's like the last real prime real estate in the city, riverfront real estate. I'm from Northeast Minneapolis originally, and North Minneapolis, where this project is, it's the hood, basically. It's the red line, one of the red line Black neighborhoods in Minneapolis that's been chronically disinvested from, over-policed. It's in one of the worst environmental racism hotspots in the state, really, where there's tons of pollution. And I grew up right across the river from there in Northeast Minneapolis, which was formerly a working class kind of European American, Eastern European immigrant, kind of the blue collar white part of town. And it very much gentrified during my lifetime. Like when I was growing up, it was a blue collar area, and the riverfront was really the catalyst for that gentrification. So I talk about that on the podcast. You know, my dad grew up right on the riverfront in Southeast Minneapolis. And it was a formerly abandoned, deindustrialized area, you know, and it was a working class area. And now it's the most prime real estate in the city of Minneapolis. So that's really one of the things that politicized me and turned me on to socialism, was watching my neighborhood change, you know. And so I had been involved in this project. I learned about the Upper Harbor, that they had plans to redevelop probably in like 2013 or 14, and was involved in various like grassroots efforts to try to get involved and challenge the project. That all came to a head in 2019, and the city council voted to green light the project. And through that, I learned so much. I learned that this was publicly owned land, that the city council was working with the wealthiest white people in the state, the Pohlad family. These are the sons of Carl Pohlad. These are white people who inherited billions of dollars, are getting exclusive rights to 48 acres of riverfront land in the hood. It's just like so offensive and disgusting. So there was a big community effort to try to stop the project. We won some concessions, but it was green lit. And coming out of that, I was just like, fuck, I got to talk about this. You know, I got all this research, wasn't sure what was going to happen. Like the coalition that was working on it, after the vote, it kind of splintered. So I met Isaac and Deanna at that time, and we thought of this idea of doing a podcast to kind of talk about the Upper Harbor. So if you look at the first like 15 episodes of our show, that's our first season, and it's all related to this piece of land. We talk about the environmental justice issues. We talk about the housing market in the Twin Cities. We talk about who are the Pohlads. And to me, it's like a real window into the capitalist political economy. It's all in this project, how the poor stay poor, how the rich stay rich, how it happens at City Hall. I was really obviously like interested in gentrification because of my experience. So that's how we started in like 2019. I think the vote was actually in 2018, and the podcast started in 2019. And then from there, we just kept going. We still get into those threads. It's covering local politics from a working class left-wing perspective, trying to critique the local political economy. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interview-based shows. We talk to a lot of organizers and activists out here. And then there's like some analysis, some monologues. It's cool. Isaac is a really talented musician and producer. So some of them come with like a soundscape. We're getting close to like 90 episodes. It's cool. It's cool that people are listening. You know, it's like, it's been a really fun project, and it's super affirming that y'all heard it and liked it. That's really dope.
No, I mean, I've been really looking forward to this conversation, because I'm not very familiar with Minneapolis, but my little brother was there for a short period of time. And, I'm from Texas and grew up across the South. And It's interesting to learn about cities like Minneapolis that, they seem very different. Obviously have different histories, but when it comes down to, these kind of stories of working class communities being pushed out, obviously racism and redlining, things like that, there's a lot of similarities. So I don't know. Right. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I'm seeing so many similarities, specifically between Minneapolis and Austin, with these fights over policing, over gentrification. So yeah.
I was wondering, you're from Austin?
Yeah.
Okay, bet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so fascinated to jump into this stuff because it's like I'm from North Dakota, so Minneapolis is really the metropole for me. I always like, oh my gosh, the big city. Look at all that stuff, but so like, give us a little background. Some things I know about Minnesota. There's some labor struggle history there. Yeah. There is right now there's a lot of corporations headquartered there, Target, Best Buy, things that. Yeah. Well, give us like the lay of the land a little bit.
For sure. I was thinking I think the baseline to start with is that this is the land of the Dakota people. 1862, the U.S. Dakota War, there was a genocide against the Dakota people. St. Paul is in Ramsey County. Alexander Ramsey, he instituted a law where any white settler who killed a Dakota person got a payment from the state, a bounty on people's heads. And that sets the foundation, that's how capitalism was formed on this land. It's the land of the Dakota people. And then the first round of capitalization, I think it was like built off the river, right? Like General Mills, Pillsbury, they were using the whatever the fucking hydropower to mill, and that they built up a lot of the big capital. 1934, like you're talking about, there was a general strike in Minneapolis. There was there's a radical history in Minnesota that I don't know a whole lot about, but we're the DFL. Our local Democrats are the DFL because there was a farmer labor party, which was a more left populist party that had rural roots and links in the city. And one of them big Democrats that they celebrate, like Humphrey or one of them, I think what he did was purge the leftists from the DFL, from the FL and merge them. Y'all probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much more, but basically a similar thing happened with the Nonpartisan League in North Dakota over the course of that time.
I know there was connections, that whole populist left in North Dakota and Minnesota.
Yep.
And then it was, white flight, capital fled, and it's real estate. I feel like that's recapitalized, or Target. I was thinking about Target is huge in Minneapolis. So to think about who really makes up the ruling class. And I wanted to kind of weave in and talk about, the issues that charged this summer, policing. And we did an episode of our podcast where we looked at Target is aggressive in the way that they collaborate with law enforcement. Target created a whole program in downtown Minneapolis, Safe City, where they donated equipment and created a closed circuit surveillance network around the whole downtown and created a blacklist of mostly Black and brown youth who weren't allowed in. They used their foundation to hire extra staff in Amy Klobuchar's prosecutor's office and upped the prosecution numbers from 3 repeat offenders to 90-something repeat offenders. And it was Target who was pushing the issue. So, of course, Target's one of the big corporations. United Health is a big private health insurer that's in the suburbs. But it's really, I've learned this term. I don't know a whole lot about it, but the FIRE economy, finance, insurance, and real estate, that's really who dominates now. And I was thinking about it thinking about the way people think about Texas and the way people think about Minnesota. It's an aggressively liberal state, and we should understand what that means. That means it's very, very violent. We have a very violent police force, and there's a real consensus around the market on any wing of whoever calls themselves progressives up here. It's an aggressively liberal, I guess, political climate is what I would call it.
And I mean, and when we get into some of this stuff specifically about policing, I mean, when you're talking about FIRE economy, this is not to say that the police were not extremely violent and brutal beforehand, but when you are creating a system where most people are sort of working service jobs versus industrial jobs, when you're basically trying to force people out of their homes and communities, right? The police become a very important tool of social control, but also, I don't know, clearing out areas, then making places safe, et cetera.
Big time. And it should be said that these developers, I was talking about the Upper Harbor Terminal, the Polad family, these billionaire developers, they're some of Jacob Frey's biggest bankrollers. So if we understand, Jacob Frey came in on an agenda where he was going to boost the policing, the amount of resources the police got, and the amount of officers. And that's not breaking from the consensus, but he came in with more energy, and it was at the behest of real estate developers. Or when I look back at when they were gentrifying Northeast Minneapolis, there was a big campaign for 50 more cops, and they opened up substations. The substation that they opened up was literally downstairs from the new market rate apartments. So exactly, like, you have to understand the murder of George Floyd and all the police violence happening in Minneapolis right now as a part of this gentrification agenda where, you know, they see big rent gaps. They want to come in and buy for the low and rent for the high. And I'm sure it's happening in cities all across the country.
Yeah, let's talk about, you know, the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent street activity. There's a perception and a conversation nationally that was had that I assume must have been a little bit frustrating to somebody locally there. Just give us your sort of outline of what people should know about what happened in Minneapolis, or what's been happening in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Well, I feel like even set in that context, people should know that, like, we have a really violent, brutal police force, like a lot of cities do. There's been high profile killing after high profile killing. You know, in 2015, they killed a man named Jamar Clark in North Minneapolis, and there was an 18-day occupation of a police station in North Minneapolis. It was a huge struggle. So much of what is happening now goes back to those roots. You know, there was a white supremacist who came and shot 5 people at the occupation. These struggles are hot, you know, and I think when you add on top of it the pandemic that was happening before George Floyd was murdered, I remember the day that George Floyd was murdered, the 2 days prior, for our podcast, we were interviewing people in local encampments of the unsheltered. You know, we have a huge homelessness problem, and people were at the boiling point. I remember feeling sick to my stomach. You know, it's just disgusting to see all these new buildings, all these people sleeping outside. So then when I got a text message like, bro, they killed somebody on 38th in Chicago, I was just disgusted. And what happened was, I think one of the ways the national media confused things, and the local media too, was pushing this outside agitator narrative, that it was outsiders that ruined peaceful protests. This was a working class rebellion, a multiracial working class rebellion. It was the people who the MPD has been brutalizing, raping, illegally dosing with drugs, murdering their family, saying, fuck this shit, we're not having it anymore, you know? So it was a popular mass rebellion, and that's really powerful, you know? And I think that's important because things have swung, so the elections have really swung us in a conservative direction. So it's really important for us to name that and lift those people up. And I feel like, for the sake of this conversation, I was thinking about your show, you know, building a no BS left. I feel like what it really exposed here was like the disconnect between kind of like the liberal left, and we have a huge nonprofit economy in the Twin Cities. You know what I'm saying? And that's a way that corporations exercise a lot of control here, is through foundations. So it really exposed a lot of the nonprofit left that talks a big game, but was not ready for the action and the leadership of like the real proletarians in the street. You know what I'm saying? The working classes who really took shit to the next level. So I feel like that's a opportunity for us to reflect on. But it also exposed where I feel like we got to do a lot more work, I feel like, to get grounded in them communities, because I think what happened then is like the trajectory that this charter amendment and like these elections have like took us on. There was like a lack of political leadership to do anything else really with the uprising. You know, there was so much energy and it was so militant that then I feel like the city council and kind of the nonprofit left seized onto that moment and pushed us in this direction that I think really like took the gas out of people and put us in these bureaucratic processes.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to note just one thing about like the way the national media was, you know, covering, you know, the rebellion too, which is like specifically what you're noting about like the outside agitator narrative. And like, just one thing I just wanted to point out about it, something I was sort of noting when it was all going on, was not only is it sort of, I don't know, you know, policing who's a legitimate protester and who's not, right? It also creates this kind of air of like fear and mistrust in groups when people are really starting to show up and build community. And like one of the things that like to address these problems, like, and I just feel like this is going to tie into a lot of the other stuff we're talking about this the election right now, is like, so you have the spontaneous rebellion, but like the political work is like building community from that as well, right? And like if you created a kind of narrative or this kind of fear frankly, on both sides, right? Because if you're afraid that everyone's going to mistrust you because, you're defacing property, etc. I don't know. It creates division, but it also creates this air of worry, and you can't trust what you see. You can't trust what you hear, right? And it's a very powerful tactic that I think a lot of people ran with without sort of wondering why that was being promoted so much across the nation. Yeah. People who weren't even in Minneapolis. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, sorry,
No, it's real, bro. It's super real. I've seen it happen, and it's like, it's interesting because there was I think like I saw real examples of people working through that and building that community. There was a occupation of a hotel. There was a hotel that wasn't even really empty. It was operating at a real low level because of the COVID, and people have been plotting on it with the encampments. And then when they hit us with the curfew, we seized that building. And for like more than 2 weeks, it was an emergency shelter, and it was chaotic and it was tough. But it was an example of something very powerful, and a lot of those relationships endure, or a lot of blocks got together. People were running ambulance services. People were running fire services. People were helping people maneuver during the curfew and get from here to there. So a lot of those relationships were built and skills were built, and a lot of people glommed onto that outside agitator narrative and turned into little police officers. You know what I'm saying? And the signal loops went from like supporting the uprising to snitching and policing, and all that is very nuanced, and a lot of people did have to defend themselves, and I'm not trying to,
there also were people who were sneaking in and causing trouble too.
Exactly. There were some outsiders out there, it's all messy, but I think when the outside agitators get focused on, then you literally got to ignore the thousands of people who were out there getting it cracking, and it's just not what it was.
There's some people who say that the media has moved on and from the damage caused by the uprising. What's your response to that? Man,
it's like they talk about the uprising still a little bit, but not that much. It's like crime, violence, crime, gunshots, violence, crime. That's like they're just beating us over the head with that, And like everywhere else, there's been like an uptick in violence. But it's being really manipulated and over exaggerated and cynically used. So it's sometimes they'll talk about, I've seen various different candidacies, are proposing in some ways how they're going to help people recover, or a lot of people are critiquing the way Jacob Frey hasn't moved money to help people recover. So it's still there, but I'd say like really the crime narrative is dominant right now.
And it's never put in the context, like you mentioned in your show, of the pandemic, which
come on, bro. Yeah.
Yeah.
Poverty, you know what I'm saying? And it's like they've been giving more and more money to the police this whole time, and conditions have been getting worse and worse and worse. This is no different than anything that's been happening. It's not a break from the norm, really. It's just like intensifying, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention all the people who aren't in the formal IRS register that didn't get any kind of checks or relief at all, right?
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about these elections coming up, but in a sort of meta way, like the electorate. You did a good focus on that. The median age, and we can talk about this I guess reaction environment, which is median age 63, and I mean just that number right there gives you, and then like I think 80% white or something.
80% white, yeah.
Right.
That's the electorate in Minneapolis, and that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I was just going to ask if you could context for people who don't really know, like how far away is that from like the actual like demographics of the city?
Very far away. I don't got the numbers in front of me, but it's very far away. We're a young city. We're an international city. It's a pretty white area compared to other parts of the country, but if that's white people are much more represented in the electorate than the general population, So to think that's who votes in Minneapolis, the average is a 63-year-old white person. And I think it's important not only to put that in the context of the larger population, the general population, but put that in the context of the people who actually risked their lives during the uprising, who actually, Derek Chauvin would not have got convicted if it wasn't for thousands and thousands and thousands of young people, Black people, Native people, people who got felonies on their record, people who don't vote for a variety of reasons, and all those people now are nowhere to be. They're out there, they're still living their lives, but they're not being addressed in the election season. I think that's a challenge for the left. And that's talking about our interview with Dr. Nims. It made me realize we really have to resist the urge to just get involved in the DFL processes. And I think that shows in one of the big questions we're voting on in this election. There's 3 charter amendments. The second one is the one that's most relevant to the murder of George Floyd and the uprising. It's calling it Yes for Minneapolis, and it's a proposal to change the structure of the city government. Right now, our city charter says we have to have a police department and it has to have a minimum amount of officers. This would take that out of, and for context, we're the only city in the state of Minneapolis or a state of Minnesota that has that specificity. The amendment would rewrite the charter to take that out and create a Department of Public Safety that the police department would be embedded inside of. And it would change their reporting structure. It would mean that rather than report to the mayor, they would report to the city council, this Department of Public Safety. And rather than just have armed police officers, they could also have social workers and people equipped to deal with mental health issues and kind of a more holistic approach to public safety, right? And there's a lot to talk about, a lot of merit in there, you know what I'm saying? But back to this question about the electorate and its relationship to the uprising and its relationship to actually socialist politics, transformative politics, in order to push this charter amendment, the whole way that it's been framed is as a pro-police thing. It's going to free police up to do the work that they have to do. You know what I'm saying? And some of the leading progressive candidates saying, don't worry, we're not going to defund the police. We're not going to cut any more officers. We're actually going to bulk up the force. So in a lot of ways, what's I think most likely to happen if this passes is it will become an expansion of the security state. There's no mandate for actually cutting officers. And the way that it's framed, there's no guarantee that these new programs won't be carceral programs, and they most likely will be. That's what's being pitched. Because that's all the DFL has. They don't have a redistributive agenda. They can't really talking about moving money away from the police because they have to pitch it to the electorate, to the 60-year-old white people who are afraid, who own homes, and who aren't moving things, So I think that's like to try to paint a picture that it's a general feeling of reaction in the city. And I think this electoral cycle where the pitching things to the electorate, nobody is really moving abolitionist vision right now that's redistributive, that's talking about transformation, that everybody's backed off this idea of defunding the police. So I guess I'm frustrated by that right now. And that's what I keep wondering is like, and I shouldn't say everybody, because there is a DSA slate and there are some good candidates who are pushing things. So it's not that simple, but generally it's like a conservative pitch to the electorate.
Right.
No, I think that's that's one of the things that's sort of difficult about a lot of realizing a lot of these demands right now is that while we're sort of appealing to like the state structures and like city council structures as like they exist currently, I'm not even talking about radical transformation. I'm just talking about political arena, political map. They're going to like mediate and interpret our demands. And like, one of the strangest things about like, for example, the whole defund and abolish movement was that kind of, early window when you started seeing Democrats saying, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to incorporate that. And you knew at that moment that we were in trouble.
Facts, bro. I was, there's a lot of, I don't know if y'all have heard about this big meeting at Powderhorn Park. Where that's the moment that's gotten most attention in the national media. It was like the second week of the uprising, and it was the day after the big march where Jacob Frey said he wouldn't defund the police, and they chanted him out. There was a meeting at Powderhorn Park called by some of the organizations moving kind of that were leading the defund movement. These are nonprofit organizations. That's important to name. And they got the city council together on the stage in front of this big banner that said defund, and they were using the term veto-proof majority. We have a veto-proof majority to defund and dismantle the police. And I remember I felt sick to my stomach because these are the same people who ignored us. We had a huge campaign in January when we turned to 2020, 6 months before George Floyd was murdered. There was a massive campaign to get the city council to try to move some money away from the MPD. And they said, fuck you. They gave them a multi-million-dollar raise 6 months ago. Why are we taking these people seriously? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where because at this point, we don't have an independent working class party that could put up leaders in that moment. The only thing the nonprofit left knew what to do was to go have a photo shoot with the city council. In that moment, the city council really successfully co-opted a lot of that energy. And we have to be more discerning than that. It's like these people, not only have they voted every year, this city council has been in office, they voted to increase the funding to the MPD. And this is a city council that came in after that occupation of the 4th precinct in 2015. So the biggest takeaway for me in this last election is that Democrats can't do anything else than manage the neoliberal city in the same way it's been managed. In the same way that they were increasing the funding to the police as when they voted to approve the Upper Harbor Terminal, voted to improve all these market rate housings. We also have the most aggressive privatization of public housing in the country happening in Minneapolis right now. And one of the frames being put forward by the national media is like Jacob Frey is like a entrenchant neoliberal who's holding back this progressive city council. That's a false read. That's not true. There's a neoliberal consensus between the city council and the mayor. There's some small degree of difference, that they squabble over a bit, but it was Lisa Bender, the president of the Minneapolis City Council, and Jacob Frey together appealed to Ben Carson so that he would loosen the restrictions and allow them to privatize more of our public housing stock. And of course, Ben Carson approved that. So it's a neoliberal consensus. I lost my train of thought. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh, no, so why would you take those people seriously? Because they've always worked against us to increase the funding to the police. And I think that's where it's important. If we're going to have a real movement to defund and abolish the police, that means transformation of the whole political economy. It really does mean a socialist transformation, whatever words you want to use. You cannot abolish the police inside of the capitalist political economy. So if you don't have somebody talking seriously about protecting and expanding public housing, they're not a serious abolitionist. You know what I'm saying? If they don't have a serious plan for houselessness, et cetera.
No, I mean, I think this is a really important point in like figuring the way out of the problem is where the tension is, right? Like, I mean, just to give an example, like here in Austin, we're having similar kind of things. Like, Austin cut the police budget, after,
I've seen that.
But they, but since then it's just been a kind of clandestine war, using special elections to refund the police. There's a new ballot that goes up on November 2nd, to force them to hire 2 police officers for like every 1,000 residents, which is going to be extremely damaging, extremely wasteful. And it's something even the interim police chief is like, I don't know who this helps, right?
Yeah.
But it helps the GOP here is why they're doing it. But it's a similar problem when it comes to like camping, and to dealing with like the houselessness crisis, right? Where like, they eradicate for a little while, they made it so that the police could not arrest people or harass people for being homeless, right? And which was a good thing, but without the other side of it, which is, expanding public housing, expanding affordable housing, it becomes a very neoliberal solution to the problem, right? Like libertarians want that. They want people to build up shanty towns outside of cities and things like that, right? So it's just like, this is the difficult, I don't have a point other than just saying like, this is the difficult, like kind of struggle that we have right now. We're trying to realize these radical demands while going through extremely neoliberal institutions. I mean, big reason why like they use police to attack and to try to, again, not solve in any kind of holistic way, but to sort of put a damper on the problem of poverty and houselessness and things like that across the city is because it's cheap, right? And if you're a budget-minded conservative, it's easier to just, fund a police department and have them beat up people in the street every time they get out of line than to, fund housing and things like that. It's just like, we really have to find ways to find a whole overhaul to this system. And like, I don't know, just like, it's hard because like, we get a lot of energy towards like specific excesses and like wickedness of the system. But man, we got to be coming to the root of it because it's hard to sort of hit them all down as they come up, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like I really feel that. It's like I learned that after the last round of municipal elections 2017, there was kind of like some star progressives, people who were out at the protests and ran as the DFL or whatever, but I kind of had some hope in them maybe that they might do something. And then when I realized it's like there's no proactive vision though or base for anything. So all they can do is kind of like the meek reforms. And it really is like the longer we defer the task of building our own organizations, we're going to continue to be in this position. It's just these last 4 years have really affirmed that for me. And I want to shout out, like, there is a DSA endorsed slate in Minneapolis this year. That's progress from the last time there wasn't. There's one of the mayoral frontrunners. Sheila Najad. She's endorsed by the DSA. She has a dual endorsement, or not a dual endorsement. She ran for the dual endorsement. The DFL didn't endorse. It was split. And then there's 3 city council members, Jason Chavez, Aisha Chugtai, who are both, Aisha is always out there on the front lines for sure. And Jason's a young person from the city who's been out here. They both have dual endorsements. And then the candidate that I'm really excited about is Robin Wansley-Warlova. She did not statedly run for the DFL endorsement. She's running on that principle of independent working class political action, talking about public housing. She has a serious plan. She doesn't back off of defunding the police, but she puts it in socialist context. So I think that's really positive, and I'm realizing like, okay, I feel like that's a good use of my time. Then is get busy with them campaigns, build each other up. And then also though, I feel like I just want to keep pointing back to though, like it was the streets that got us here. There wouldn't be a charter amendment if there wasn't that mass mobilization on the streets. And it's so easy to get sucked back into like the parliamentary arena, and all those debates. And it's like, and there's a class basis to that too. It's like important. In the city right now, everybody that's talking about politics really just ignores the thousands and thousands of poor people, working class people who changed the whole situation. You know what I'm saying? That's really where the power is. That's the revolutionary classes for real, So it's like, I'm really thinking like, how do I spend more time trying to connect with those people?
Yeah.
Rent control is also on the ballot.
Yep.
Talk about the situation with rent control in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Hell yeah. First of all, St. Paul, it's a different situation. St. Paul is voting on a rent control policy. So they've outlined a universal rent control policy that caps rents at like 2 to 3%. That's very important because, as we're talking about rent control across the country, it's important that we define the terms, and we need universal rent control policies, not policies that have exemptions for when the building was built, you know what I'm saying? The size of the building. What that does is creates 2 tiers in the markets. It gives landlords a bunch of outs and it weakens rent control policies. So St. Paul's is a universal rent control policy. It's a really good policy. And because of that, the landlord lobby has spent like millions of dollars in just this last week, but they're pushing that in St. Paul. And I think they got a good shot at it. In Minneapolis, it's different. We are voting on, we're giving, if our charter amendment passes around rent control, then city council is empowered to create a rent control policy and pass it. Because right now, state law preempts a rent control policy at the municipal level. And that's the same in most states in the country. That was a American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, the Koch-funded group. In the 1980s, they moved all these almost identical rent control preemptions at the state level. So this charter amendment in Minneapolis would allow us to pass a rent control policy. So it's important. We don't have the terms defined like in St. Paul. And what's very dangerous is, again, this liberal nonprofit co-optation is what's happening. Now the conservative nonprofits and the city council have jumped on and they're branding themselves as champions for rent control, but they're criticizing St. Paul's rent control and saying that what Minneapolis should do is make a more market-friendly policy that's more lenient. So that's really the struggle in Minneapolis is, we want to vote yes on rent control, but then it's going to be a big fight. And maybe we could talk about it another time, or I want to do an episode of our show about it. It was a really deliberate sabotage. There was originally 2 charter amendments. The original charter amendment was to say the renters that the city could pass a rent control policy through charter amendment. So it would be a renter-led process that we would create a policy and the policy would go on the ballot. It wouldn't be voted on at the city council. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And it was nonprofits stepped in and killed that option and created a city council-led option. So that's really what we're battling in Minneapolis is like liberal co-optation. They're really wise up here in how they do that.
Yeah.
Managing democracy.
Really?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Same everywhere, it seems like.
I bet. Yeah. Do y'all got a lot of nonprofits where you're at?
Well, I mean, New York, I'm sure, but like you look at what's going on with India Walton and how the cities, even there, like you can't escape these people. These freaks are everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, it's just like I don't know. This is why we have to start making the jump, from being class-focused politics to class-rooted politics. And what I mean by that is just like, you can talk about the issues, but when you're rooted in the communities and the people, we have different power and like abilities. And like, this is why though, at the same time, like getting some people into office, even before we're, even before we're like, being able to break or create our own party, etc. It's like, it's good to have people who understand how power works so that they can utilize it too in the future. Like, and I'm sure it's a similar case in Minneapolis. Like, we do have DSA members here in Austin in city council, and like having that knowledge is critical, right? Because then they say like, okay, well, this is coming up, or this is what we can do. This is like what's available to us. And that's really helpful too. And like, I don't know, building that kind of move, which is very different from like the nonprofit model, which is very much like managing issues.
Yeah.
You filter out the demands, and then you bring it to the, the people with real power and figure out what they will allow you to do. Right.
Exactly.
They work as a mediating. Yeah. I mean, and like, it's American history is like fascinating with this move of like the radical left. The move from the radical left from like, being rooted in communities, et cetera, to like the nonprofit sector, because it has sort of functioned like, look, you can do some good things. You can bring up some issues, but frankly, all these issues are so deeply connected that, coming without like a rooted perspective or rooted movement behind you makes it really hard to address them.
Facts, bro. And it was a deliberate strategy of the capitalist class to create those foundations, and create those nonprofits. I knew that coming into it. I've worked in nonprofits most of my adult life and been on the left and also working in nonprofits. And, a lot of people here have that literacy to talk about the nonprofit industrial complex. And in the Uprising, you really seen those contradictions become very, very, very clear. Literally, I'm seeing young people pushing the line against the police, and the nonprofit worker come in and, calm everybody down. But it used to work. That shit was not working in 2020 at all, never mind.
Well, I was just saying, is there anything else, Jake? I think we definitely need to have you back, and maybe some of your crew, if you guys ever want to do a collaboration.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
I mean, this is fascinating.
We would love to. No, I really appreciate it, man. I've been a fan of y'all's work. I was excited. It's funny because before you even DM'd me, I seen that you liked my tweet. Now, baby fanboyed. I was like, oh shit, man. I appreciate the invitation. Anything else? I'll say support Dylan Robinson. Dylan Robinson is a young man who's doing federal time right now for being at the site of the 3rd precinct burning. I was saying I got to know more names and lift up more people, because he's not the only person that's incarcerated right now. So lift up Dylan Robinson. There's a fundraiser that you can find at Eagle Screen Print on Instagram, and you could buy a t-shirt that goes to supporting Dylan Robinson while he's incarcerated. And hell yeah, it was really good to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Cool. We'll put a link to that and Money, Power, Land Solidarity in the show notes. Thanks again, Jake.
Right on, definitely.